We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to make DSW a reality. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, the Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero, and our track sponsors who help make the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline and event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kinzon, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner.
Denver, Colorado-based design, fabrication, and multimedia marketing firm that allows your company to craft an authentic presence to your target audience. For the past 15 years, the Public Works Media team has been telling stories with words, pictures, and films. Our unique approach to brand storytelling allows us to get strong reactions and results from our content. We work in experienced and nimble teams with our crew of producers, directors, and cinematographers that all have first-hand experience and international presence. We are fortunate to have amazing clients that allow us to get wherever we need to go with the right tools for the highest production value. Lots of people can take a pretty picture. Just look at Instagram. While we believe our images speak for themselves, what really sets us apart is our decades of experience, our network, and our ability to make shit happen when it counts. We love bringing unexpected partners together to create added value for everyone. And most of all, we love when we finish a job confident that we've not only executed, but elevated the end product, and we know that everyone involved enjoyed the process. Our company was founded on the idea that life is about learning and teaching through every experience. We apply a strict discipline of work hard, play hard, and make great fucking work. We amplify awesome. We surround ourselves with the best and feed off of infectious innovation, ideas, collaboration, and building long-term friendships and partnerships. Contact us anytime for a meeting at our office, golf course, or on the chairlift.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last day of Denver Startup Week. And this is the design track, the first ever virtual and global Denver Startup Week. And we are here to introduce, I'm here to introduce Designing for Altered States with Fen Slattery of Click Studios. A couple of things I want to say before we get started. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, race, age, ability, sexual orientation, and any combination of those identities. And we take that really seriously. We want to make sure everyone feels welcome, heard, safe, and represented. And so let us know if that's not the case. Up next on the designer track, really this is our last live session, and we're really excited about it. This is a topic I've never thought about before, and I think is really clever and interesting and very Colorado. But if you do want to experience more on the designer track, be sure to check out our virtual club experience. It's on the schedule, and then we have an after party with 7+ hours of local DJ sets. And I think through today, you can check out all of everything on YouTube, everything on the entire schedule. And then we're going to take it down, do some editing, and then republish it in October, I believe. So I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Fen. I'm really excited about this. Thanks for doing it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really
Uh-huh.
appreciate the intro.
Take it
Um,
away.
Thank you so much. Uh, Jessica says in the chat, grand finale. I'm interested in knowing, as I do my introduction about myself, if folks who are calling in via Zoom, can you just let me know in the chat where you're watching from? I really like having a sense of what time of day it is by you and things like that to have an idea of what kind of mood you're in. I know for me, it's a Friday afternoon, so perfect time for this talk, right? Okay, so you are here for Designing for Altered States, Lessons from Accessible Design. You'll notice I do also have some live captioning going on the bottom of my screen. If you notice any errors, it's because it's automated, not being done by a human, but hey, it's pretty good. Okay, so I'm Fen Slattery. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the accessibility lead at Click Studios. That essentially means it's my job to make sure that everything that goes out our door is usable by people with disabilities. And that means educating our team and our partners and folks externally like you. I'm also a co-organizer of one of the world's largest digital accessibility and inclusive design meetups here in Chicago. So it's pretty cool. Our events are all online right now, so they're open to anybody, regardless of where you are. And I'm also a certified professional in accessibility core competencies from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. I remembered all those acronyms correctly. I'm so proud of myself. Uh, so in addition to all these other professional qualifications and experience, if you will, this talk is also relevant to me because I am a medical cannabis user. I'm autistic, amongst other disabilities I have, but the main one I use cannabis for is autism. My use of cannabis helps me in a lot of different ways. It helps me navigate overwhelming social situations like difficult meetings or meeting new people. Also going through a period where I'm feeling nonverbal, where it's very difficult to talk out loud. Emotional regulation, dealing with sensory processing issues I have. Appetite issues, processing meltdowns and autistic burnout. There's a lot of stuff, and we could probably have a whole separate talk about cannabis and autism, but I use cannabis medically for a lot of these reasons that help me with my disability. And in addition to that, when you really combine my use of medical cannabis, my professional experience, and my disability myself, I know a thing or two about designing for people who are using cannabis. My hope today in this hour or so we have is to go through for you just some basics of accessibility, so we're all caught up and in the same place. We're going to talk through how cannabis use impacts people's abilities and perceptions and things like that. Go over some accessibility guidelines and principles for you to follow. And then we're going to tie it all together and apply our knowledge to improving the experience of people who are in an altered state, such as using cannabis. Sound good? I hope it sounds good. That's what we're doing. Okay, so to catch y'all up, let's talk about accessibility. My assumption here is that maybe a lot of you folks have heard of the word accessibility before or have done accessible work either in a physical space or in a digital space like on the web. But let's get to a comfortable baseline. So what the heck is accessibility? Accessibility is designing for people with disabilities, put simply. It's also about removing barriers to access that might prevent disabled people from fully engaging with a product or service or whatever the thing is that you've designed. It's also about including people. I feel pretty strongly that we have an ethical duty when we design things to make sure that everyone can use that thing that we've created. It's important to understand also that accessibility benefits everybody, not just those of us with disabilities. Usability and accessibility go hand in hand. A good design is an accessible design, and an accessible design is a good design. We actually have a name for this in the accessibility world. It's called the curb cut effect. Think about when you're walking down the sidewalk and you've come to the road. There's probably a little dip down in the sidewalk, a little ramp, or called a curb cut. And this exists because people with disabilities pushed for the Americans with Disabilities Act to be passed here in the US. And so those little ramps exist for people who have a mobility need, like they're a wheelchair user, right? It allows them to get down off the curb. But also that curb cut helps you if you're, you're pushing a stroller, or you're carrying a big heavy thing, or you're like me and you're looking at your phone and not paying attention and you don't want to trip up a curb, right? That curb cut exists for people with disabilities, but helps everybody. The same thing is true in digital spaces, which is where I'm going to focus this talk a bit, is on digital accessibility. We can think of things like captions, right, on a video. Those captions are necessary for someone who is deaf, let's say, or hard of hearing in order to understand what's going on. But those also help you out if maybe the video is in a language you don't speak very well, or the person has an accent you're not familiar with, or you just forgot your headphones and you still want to understand the video. The things we do to make something more usable for people with disabilities make it more usable for everyone, which is awesome, right? The other thing that you should know is that accessibility is a human right that's protected by law in a lot of places around the world, including in the US by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you have to make things accessible. Here's the thing though, maybe we're all on board with how much we love accessibility, but when we think in a digital space, as of February of this year, a little over 98% of the 1 million most popular websites, 1 million of them, 98% of them had significant accessibility failures just on their homepage. That is, 98% of the top million websites have something that makes it so a person with disabilities can't use that website. Pause for effect. That's a lot, right? So despite this being necessary and a civil right, we're just not thinking about it, or we're struggling to do it. So I think we can do a better job as an industry. Other little facts you should know, about 1 in 5 people worldwide have a disability of some kind, and 1 in 10 people have a disability like mine that significantly impacts how we use technology and use the web. Awesome, that's a lot of people. Also, you should note that disability is more common in certain groups. Black and Latinx people are more likely to be disabled. Also, older folks are more likely to be disabled. Again, we could do a whole talk about disability stats, but this is not that talk, my friends. So when we're thinking in a digital space, if we're designing a website, let's say, disabled users might interact with what you have made with different hardware. Maybe we're using some different physical input device that works better for us, but using different software, either a different browser or a tool that reads the site out loud to us. We also are changing available settings. So maybe changing the zoom in our browser so everything looks bigger. And we're also utilizing content that you provide to us that maybe not everyone else uses, such as alternative text on an image. We're still using technology. We're still using our computer and your website. We're just accessing it in a slightly different way. Also relevant is disability might impact things like your vision, your hearing, your cognition. That is how you think, how you learn, how you remember things, how you take in information. It might also impact your motor skills. So both fine motor skills, like little movements of a pencil or something, right? Or gross motor skills, like moving entire limbs. And it might impact multiple of these. It might make you more sensitive to certain kinds of inputs, less sensitive. Regardless, disability impacts us in a lot of different ways. Very relevant to what we're thinking about, though, when we're designing for altered states, is there are different ways to conceive of accessibility needs. They might be permanent, temporary, or situational. Let's dive in. So a permanent accessibility need. Let's say you're trying to do a fine motor task, like, I don't know, like writing something, right? Well, you might have a permanent disability in the form of just not having a hand. You don't have the fine motor skills in that hand because you don't have it. Or a permanent cognitive disability would be something like autism. Maybe you're trying to navigate a difficult emotional situation, and that is a permanent disability that will impact how you interact with it. Temporary examples of that fine motor skill might be your hand is broken. I broke my hand last year. Do not recommend it. Not a fun time. It's going to make it difficult for me to write. But eventually, my hand healed. It was just a temporary disability. A cognitive temporary accessibility need might be maybe you've recently gone through some sort of emotionally traumatic event, and it's difficult for you to think right now. Hopefully with therapy, you're healing over time though. So it's just temporary. Situationally, though, maybe these are things that aren't an inherent quality of you. Situational accessibility needs are things based on the context you're in. So what are those? Well, a situational fine motor accessibility need, maybe you're holding a baby in your arms. You can't really use your hand too well because you're holding a kid. And a situational accessibility need from a cognitive perspective might be that you're high. Pow, pow. I feel like I should have music. Yeah, welcome to this talk. You have a situational cognitive accessibility need. Ta-da! Okay, cool. So we understand a little bit more about accessibility, a little bit more about disability. So let's talk through how cannabis use interacts with this. Caveat, this is different for everybody, right? What a recreational user feels when they use cannabis might be the opposite of a medical user's experience. I talked through in my experience as an autistic user of medical cannabis, it can help me think more clearly and perceive things more clearly, but using it recreationally might do the opposite. Caveat 2, for many of us, as I've said, our difficulties and our accessibility needs come up when we're not using cannabis or not using whatever it is, but in this context, medical cannabis users. My difficulties are when I'm not using it. Caveat number 3, I'm basing this talk off of common recreational experiences with cannabis in the present day United States. Other contexts might vary. I only have so much time. We're talking about right now in the US. And caveat number 4, considering I'm scoping this to recreational use for a lot of this talk, I'm going to probably slip into some that might be more associated with recreational use to indicate that difference. I know a lot of medical users like myself might not like applying words like being high to using cannabis for medical purposes. So just owning the fact that I'm using words that might not be comfortable for everyone. And now with 4 caveats, let's move forward. So specifically, like I said, I'm scoping this to digital interactions. How does being high impact how you use a computer? Pause for dramatic effect. I'm going to drink some water. Cool. Okay. Just realized I don't have a clock. There we go. Now I know what time it is. How does being high impact how you use a computer? Okay, so I thought of a lot of different ways I could research this. I could have looked up a bunch of academic studies. I'm sure people have done excellent work in that space. I could have done a formal poll of a bunch of different medical users and recreational users. I could have done also a lot of reading in a lot of cannabis use spaces and just anecdotal reports. I did none of those things. Well, okay, I did them. But the main thing I did to research this was I got super high and then tried to do a bunch of things on a computer and took very thorough notes. Welcome to this talk, folks. It's Friday afternoon. Okay, so what did I attempt to do? I chatted with several people simultaneously via text in messages in a messaging program called Discord. Think of it kind of like Slack, but more of a gamer bent, whatever. I listened to a bunch of different music and podcasts on Spotify. I used Firefox to do online shopping and browsing, rather. I didn't buy anything, but browsing on a bunch of different sites that were completely new to me. There was a cool promotion going on Instagram, so I found a lot of cool vendors I didn't know about. I also wrote notes about my experience in my note-taking program I use called Joplin. It's open source. It's really simple. It uses Markdown. So it's just plain text, pretty much, no formatting. And after about an hour, I decided I wanted to start designing phone wallpapers for myself using a vector graphics program called Affinity Designer. If you're familiar with Illustrator, it's very similar to Adobe Illustrator. So I made some choices. I'm really exposing my whole self in this talk. I appreciate you all for being here. Okay, so I told you I took notes, and I need you to know I did not plan on showing these to you. I took earnest notes when I was high, And I tried very, very hard to be serious, to be clinical in my observations of myself. And I tried so hard. So yeah, I have decided to present these notes to you as I wrote them. And don't worry, after this, we're going to dissect this and maybe have some more insights that Hi-Fen did not have. So what did I say over this period of about 2 hours as I got super high and tried to use a computer? Hello, future Fen. This is Hi-Fen. Things that are hard on computer when you're high. Things are too small to see. Gotta zoom the page in to see shit and understand what's going on. Forget that I was doing a thing and get distracted by something else. Gotta leave tabs open to remind myself. Get emotional about things like, OMG, this is so beautiful. Or this is the most beautiful hat I've ever seen. Or that's the cutest puppy ever. Thoughts trail off, especially when I'm typing. Fingers heavy. Typing feels so weird. Sense of time gets weird. Might not remember things as they happened later. I was really worried about that. As a note, I tried to take a lot of good notes because I was so worried I would not remember. Motivated by more basal needs. Food, thirsty, hugs, good tunes. Those are the most basic human needs. Specific or precise mouse movements are hard, like navigating the mega menu on this site. And then I put in a link. It was an online shopping site with a big mega menu that was nested. Take a bit longer to do a movement or plan movements or take in sensory input. I'm really proud of myself for just being able to write the phrase sensory input while really high. Stronger emotional response to a site being difficult to use. Go ARG and close the tab instead of powering through. Note-taking program updates a little icon when it syncs with an animation and this bar flashing, and I get so distracted by it. I hope that wasn't too loud yelling into my mic. Clicking and dragging to resize a window is so hard to do. Gotta concentrate and be so precise. Fixing typos is hard, as you'll see more of in a sec. Easily startled, like I accidentally hit tab in Affinity Designer, and it did a thing I didn't recognize, and I freaked out. Color picking is hard, as in color picking from something on the screen. Color picking is hard. I take so long and think so much about the act of holding down the mouse that I forget what I was gonna color pick. It felt like hours of me trying to color pick and it not working. It was probably 2 minutes. Thank you, Hi-Fen. I love you. Have a nice day. Aw, that's so nice. Let's applaud for Hi-Fen. They tried really hard. Okay, so those were my notes about my field research, if you will. Also, because I know one of the partners of my company is here, do not worry, Ted. I did this on my own time. I did not get high in the middle of a day just to prepare for a talk. Do not worry. Let's summarize all those weird insights I had. Let's talk about this a little more scientifically. So it sounds like my short-term memory was really poor. I was easily distracted. I had very strong emotional responses to things. I had visual difficulties and distortions, so it was harder to see things. I had to zoom in more. As a note, that's something that I experience because of my autism in stressful situations, sometimes just always, but while I was recreationally high, I experienced visual difficulties. I also had very poor fine motor control, as I talked about with clicking and dragging. I was really easily confused, and I had an altered perception of time. So these are my 7 big insights about how, at least for me, using a computer while very high went. So how do we make things easier for a dear, lovely Hi-Fen who I love so much? Hint, tip, it's by following the same guidelines and principles that we use to design for users of a website who have a disability. If you do all the same stuff to make your site accessible, It will also be a wonderful experience for people that are high. And I guess vice versa. If your main concern is your technology working well for people who are high, bonus, it's going to be better for all of us with disabilities. So cool. Hey, right. Love it. Okay, I'm going to go through 3 different sets of design guidelines that you can use as a reference. Again, these are all things that I could and have spent several hours talking about in other talks. So this is more an introduction for you as a way to get started and learn more and think about this. The first I want to talk about are the universal design principles. These are a set of principles that were created in 1997, specifically about the design of physical spaces for people with disabilities, but they're also really helpful to think about when we think about digital design. Oh, and as a note, because I have this link, I will have these slides up after this talk for you to flip through and click through links. So don't worry too much about taking notes or things like that if you don't want to. So universal design principles, what are they? There are 7 of them. We'll go over them quickly here. The first is equitable use. People should be able to engage with the space or the thing you've created, regardless of who they are, regardless of their ability. Flexibility in use. This means I should be able to interact with this designed object in a variety of different ways. It shouldn't require me to only do it in one specific way. Its use also needs to be simple and intuitive. It shouldn't require big explanations. It should be something that a human being can most of the time just kind of figure out. It needs to have perceptible information. So what does that mean? It means I need to be able to understand it with the senses I have available. Visually, hearing, tactile in the form of Braille, just the information needs to be perceptible in a variety of different ways. There also needs to be a tolerance for error in your physical space. A good way to think of this is maybe you're going into a building that has a plate that you press to open the door, intended for a wheelchair user, for example. That plate I press to open the automatic door shouldn't be tiny, or I shouldn't have to press it really hard. I should be able to, touch it relatively lightly, and they're usually pretty big. There should be a high tolerance for error. Related to that is low physical effort in the physical space. Nothing should require a lot of strength. It shouldn't require a lot of speed. It shouldn't require much effort on my part. And last is it needs to be of an appropriate size and have enough space for somebody to approach it in whatever way they need to and use it. You can think of this, again, a lot of these are almost geared towards people who are users of mobility devices like wheelchairs. So you can think of this like, I don't know, maybe there's a kiosk, an ATM, right? An ATM, and it needs to be in a place and designed in such a way that I can approach it from different angles. And regardless of, am I sitting in my wheelchair? Am I standing up? However I am, there needs to be space for me to get to it and use it. And like I said, these are all about physical space, but this really, for me, kicks up a lot of things digitally and ties in to the next 2 things we'll talk about as well that are more designed in a digital space. The next one is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the next set of principles to follow. This is also called the WCAG or WCAG. It's a very goofy acronym to pronounce, but that's how we say it. This is a set of rules that was first created in the 90s, but has been updated every few years since then. It's a set of rules that you follow to ensure minimum digital accessibility, usually on websites, but it also governs things like PDFs, stuff like that. This set of guidelines is also the basis for most digital accessibility laws around the world. It's created by the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. They're the folks that essentially make the rules for how the internet works. How does a browser work? How does HTML work? And in this case, how does it work as regards accessibility? Now, there are a ton of guidelines in the WCAG, and if you're a person who designs digitally, I really recommend reading through them. A lot of them are specifically about visual design and experience design, so really, really important stuff. But there are 4 broad principles that these guidelines are organized into, and I think they're worth talking about here. The first principle says that websites need to be perceivable. And this is, if you think back to what we were just talking about in those inclusive design principles, really it's just, it needs to be available to my senses, whatever senses I have available. It also needs to be operable. So I need to be able to interact with your website in a variety of different ways. That might be with a mouse. It might be using only my keyboard. It might be using other kinds of assistive technology like a screen reader. It means all of the different things that I can interact with on your site, I can interact with them regardless of my technology and regardless of my ability. The third principle is understandable. This means that those things that I am reading and taking in, I can understand them and process them. So guidelines underneath this have to do with clear language, clear instructions, things like that. I've perceived it, I can interact with it, do I understand what's happening? And the fourth principle is robust. This essentially says, does your website work on a variety of different technologies? My hat keeps slipping back. This is so funny. There, now it's really on. Anyways, it's robust. Essentially, can it work with a variety of different browsers, operating systems, different assistive tech? Is it future-proof? That last one more has to deal with code, but hey, these are the general principles we follow when we're thinking about digital accessibility. And now the last set of principles I want to talk about in this group of 3, so that way you know what to follow, is the inclusive design principles. These are really cool. They can be applied very broadly, but they're specifically created in a digital context. They're created by a group of, I think, 4 or 5 different digital accessibility professionals and advocates. And they are licensed in the Creative Commons, so you can do whatever you want with them. But essentially, they're a set of principles that maybe compared to the WCAG, are more human-centric and put people first and think about the design for the needs of disabled people. Not to say the WCAG doesn't do that, but it's a lot of these they're phrased a bit differently from how the WCAG talks about it, is essentially the difference. And they're grouped very nicely, I think. This also happens to have 7 principles. I guess 7 is the number of the day, right? The inclusive design principles say that you need to provide a comparable experience. So the same things you do for somebody who is completely abled, their experience is comparable to somebody who's disabled. Needs to be similar, if not the same. You also need to consider the situation that the user is in and the context in which they're using your site. You need to be consistent. So your design patterns have to be the same across different pages, across different parts of the page. You need to give control. Let the user let the user know what's best for them. Give the user different options and give them control over how aspects of your site works. Similarly, you need to offer choice. Give them a variety of ways to take in information, to navigate a website. You need to prioritize the content over anything else. The whole point of your website, I'm assuming for most of us, the point of your website is the content on it. So really, the priority should be the user getting to the content, perceiving it, reading it, understanding it. That should come before anything else, that content experience. And you need to add value for the user, which hopefully we're doing in everything we design. Okay. I feel like I just gave you a crash course in inclusive design principles and things like that, but I'm noticing, Fen, there's been that cute cannabis leaf on all of these slides. How do we apply this to people who are high? What could we have changed for high Fen to make my experience better? I have a lot of ideas on this, so let's dive in. Here's that summary of issues I gave you again. Short-term memory is poor, easily distracted, strong emotional responses, visual difficulties and distortions, poor fine motor control, easily confused, and an altered perception of time. So applying these set of inclusive design principles and the WCAG, let's see if we can improve my digital experience. Okay, so the first one here is poor short-term memory. I'm gonna grab a drink of water, one sec. Okay, poor short-term memory. So this, as you saw in the notes, occurred when, most of all, when I was navigating multiple websites, like opening a bunch of different links on Instagram and browsing a bunch of different shops. This also came up a lot when I was having multiple simultaneous conversations with several different people. This was also a difficulty when I was in my design program and trying to alter aspects of the design, or this was also come up when I thought, ooh, I should add this image to this phone wallpaper. And I would go look in folders on my computer to find it, and then forget what I was looking for or why I was there. And occasionally I would completely forget that I had even been working on designing phone wallpapers, and then move a window and think, oh, that's right, I forgot I was doing that. Awesome, cool. So poor short-term memory. This also applies going forward. So not only my short-term memory in the moment, but keeping those memories, essentially turning them into long-term memory. Okay, so what could have helped me with this? Well, a big thing we think about, and I think you heard me mention, in fact, when I was going through those guidelines and principles, is consistent navigation across pages. So within a website, the navigation shouldn't look different or behave differently on the homepage versus other pages. And that's a thing, especially I've encountered with a lot of online stores. I don't know if it's something that, different templates like Shopify will do out of the box, but a lot of the times navigation will be different. That can be very confusing to those of us who have cognitive disabilities, as well as folks who are high. Can be hard to remember what's going on. You also want to use consistent navigational patterns that are common just in general on the web. I know we can all be very tempted to do some cool new, user interface element. Nobody's ever thought of making a navigation in the bottom left, and you have to click on it and then do all the whatever, right? You want to follow common navigational design patterns, so that way it's easy for the user to remember where they are and what's going on your site. Another great thing is an activity log of some kind. So maybe I can explain this with an example. Something that made it very easy for me to deal with poor short-term memory was when I was chatting with folks, I could scroll up and see my chat log. It was right there in front of me. I could see, oh, a minute ago I said this, and it made it easier to remember what was going on in the conversation. Similarly, if I was thinking, oh, wasn't I doing this? Wasn't I looking for some kind of image? Crap, what was I looking for? Maybe I'm searching on Google for some image for something, right? I would have to go into my browser history. I did this, I'm this kind of person. I went into my browser history and looked at my past searches and my search history to see what it was I had been trying to find, so I could try to find it again. So logs of my activity of one kind or another make it easier for me to remember what I was doing and why I was doing it. This would happen a bit when I was in that design program. I was, changing things, moving them around, and then forget how it had looked before. And I had to, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z to get back. In general, things like these kind of activity logs, so a user can tell what they've most recently done, are going to be very helpful for people who are high, and also those of us who just have short-term memory issues outside of an altered state, those of us who have a disability. Also very helpful are captions and transcripts. Let me tell you, this was so helpful when I was watching different videos. If I would have a just momentarily forget what was going on in the show I was watching or whatever, I could read the captions going back a little bit and continue to follow. For example, if maybe right now during this talk, you got a notification on your phone and you looked away for a bit and you weren't really paying attention to me, you might look back and read the captions backwards a little bit to catch up on what I just said. Similarly, captions are very helpful if you're dealing with short-term memory issues. Also, super important, clear instructions. Maybe I went to go purchase something, right? And I added something to my cart. And I've now been redirected to pay using PayPal. There needs to be clear instructions on that page saying, here was your cart from that other store. This is the store you were just at, things like that. Not that I'm advocating going shopping while in an altered state, maybe not a good choice, but those clear instructions are necessary for those of us who have a disability that impacts our memory. It is necessary for us to be able to keep track of what we're doing. Just a sample of ways we can help with that poor short-term memory. Okay, let's keep scooting. How are we doing on time? Oh, we got some time. Cool. Next up was being easily distracted. Oh my gosh. Now, this is something that I experience just day to day with my autism. I can be easily distracted, but specifically when I am using in a medical way, I get way more easily distracted for whatever brain reason. I don't know. As you noticed in my notes, my note-taking program, like I said, it syncs, every 2 minutes or whatever to the cloud, and it spins a little synchronizing little icon. And every time that happened, it was in the corner of my eye. I have multiple screens. It was in the corner of my eye, and I would get completely distracted and go look at it. So something to help me from being distracted would be to give me, the user, the option to pause, stop, or completely hide movement on a page. If I had a setting in that note program that would turn off that icon spinning when it synchronizes, that would have helped me out a lot. Or if on a web page I go to, maybe there's some cool animation, right? It's very evocative and it communicates emotion and feeling. But if there's animation going on in this part of my screen, I cannot pay attention to anything else other than that animation. So giving me the ability to stop it completely or pause it is really necessary. And again, this applies directly to helping those of us with disabilities. If we're easily distracted, we need the ability to stop that movement. Also, captions, and I've already mentioned these, but captions would also be very helpful to me when I'm being easily distracted. For that same reason I mentioned, right? If I'm looking away for a bit, ooh, there's, this animation's happening. Ooh, cool. And then I look back at what I was watching. It lets me catch up on what I just missed. And I don't have to rewind the whole video. It's really good too if I'm maybe I'm watching something live, like a cool talk at Denver Startup Week, or I'm watching something on Twitch, right? I can have the captions on and just look back and see what I missed. Another important thing, if I'm being easily distracted and I'm going through a process, or maybe I'm making something, right, in a design program, my progress being automatically saved is super important. I think there were a handful of times as I did this field research where I just didn't remember why I had my design program open. And so I just kind of closed it. Luckily for me, my progress was being automatically saved and I could recover it. This would also be necessary, again, if I'm going through a purchase path of some kind, or, well, heck, even when I was just browsing all those stores. A thing I do to be responsible when I'm using cannabis is I don't purchase things. I add everything to my cart, and then I take the tab that cart is in, and I put it somewhere else on my screen. So that way, the next day or whatever, the not high me can review my intended purchases and decide if I want to buy them. Almost like I'm a little kid asking my mom, hey, can I buy this? That's kind of how I work. So being able to have that cart dependably persist allows me, when I'm easily distracted, to catch back up on it later. Also, in general, I need to be able to postpone and suppress interruptions of some kind or another for similar reasons to pausing or stopping or hiding movement. If maybe, I don't know, I've used some programs before where it's not auto-saving. Here's a good example. Visual Studio Code. I'm also a developer. It's a coding program, right? It's possible to set it so it doesn't auto-save my code, but it will start giving me little warnings, be like, hey, you haven't saved in 5 minutes, you haven't saved in 10 minutes, things like that, right? And that could be potentially very helpful. But if I'm being easily distracted, having those little interruptions pop up is awful. And similar sorts of things, right? If I'm watching something or trying to complete a task, or here's a really good one. Maybe I'm browsing an online store and now there's a little pop-up saying, hey, give us your email for a coupon. I am very distracted by those little coupon pop-ups. I would like the ability to suppress them so they don't ever show up. I'm going to pick it up pace-wise a little bit more here. Strong emotional responses, both positive, like, oh my gosh, I love this new enamel pin. I have to have it. It's beautiful. as well as strong negative responses of, what's this shitty website? It's not working how I want. I'm angry. I'm going to close it, right? I need to have clear labels on instructions so I know what's happening and so I don't get mad and frustrated about it. I also need easy to find help resources on the page, on the website, right? Or if it's in a program I have, both being able to contact a human being who can help me, as well as to find a guide to using the program or fixing problems with checkout or whatever it is. And again, I don't want to, repeat myself too much here, but every single one of these suggestions I'm giving you helps me when I'm high, also helps those of us with disabilities who experience these things day to day, unrelated to cannabis use. Also, all of these are direct guidelines taken from the web content accessibility guidelines or those other sets of principles. Just as a note. Let's keep going. Oh, the last one for the strong emotional response is there needs to be predictable responses to inputs I give. You essentially, your site or your app or whatever it is needs to follow standard patterns. So if I select a drop-down menu, right, and I want to select, I don't know, something in that menu, if when I click on it, suddenly the entire page changes, that's, whoa, that's really unpredictable. I'm going to be very flustered. And now a user who is not in an altered state, who doesn't have a disability that impacts them in that way, maybe you can roll with it. Maybe you go, oh, the whole page changed. Oh, that's weird. Oh, let's keep going. But for me when I'm high, or me when I'm very autistic and not high, that throws me off so completely. I have a very strong emotional response. So make your responses predictable to my inputs. Next, those visual difficulties and distortions. So your technology you've designed needs to respond correctly to zoom. That is, if I'm zooming in on my browser and my browser settings, it needs to correctly zoom and still be usable, which you'd be surprised how many sites that does not work on. I am very used to, because of my just day-to-day accessibility needs, often zooming websites to be able to see images more clearly. And also when I'm high, it is zoomed in very far to be able to see the things I'm looking at and to be able to see detail. So that's very important. It needs to work well with Zoom. You also need to have sufficient contrast. There are tools you can use to check the contrast of your text and images and all that stuff. It needs to be enough for me to be able to see. You also need to not have images of text. So what do I mean by that? Unless it's your logo or something like that, you shouldn't be adding text to a page by like an image of the text. It needs to be actually on the page, because when I zoom, that image isn't going to actually zoom the text in a way that's more readable for me. It's going to get pixelated and crappy. So it needs to actually be on the page. You also need to convey meaning in multiple ways, not just by using color. So if I'm having a difficult time processing things visually, or maybe I am colorblind, or for whatever reason I'm having a visual difficulty, you don't want to rely on maybe only making text red to indicate that it's wrong, or things like that. Communicate things also with words and iconography and patterns, not just color if I can't see color correctly. And also super important, you need to not have flashing or blinking content. As we talked about a little bit ago, that's distracting. But also that can straight up be difficult for me to read if I'm having a visual difficulty, as I did when I was high. But also I have my own sensory processing issues as part of autism, and it can be just straight up difficult for me to read something if it's flashing or blinking. Also relevant, flashing and blinking content can trigger seizures in some users. So just avoid it. Just avoid it completely. What was next? Poor fine motor control. Aha. So when I was using my mouse to try to click on a specific thing on my screen, it was really hard if I needed to click in a specific area. I almost started crying when I was trying to color pick in my design program, because I was trying to get a specific pink in a specific pixel, and I could not click on it. I was having such a big struggle. So in general, on a site and in your program, click or tap areas, if we're talking about a mobile site, those need to be large, those target areas. And there's actually specific guidelines in the WCAG about how many pixels that needs to be that you can look at, but they need to be sufficiently big so it's easy for me to click. There also needs to be sufficient space between the things I'm trying to click on. So maybe there's a row of social media icons, right? They're all sufficiently big, but they're all right next to each other. Ugh. I'm going to have a hard time clicking on the specific one I want if I'm in the space between them. So have a large target area and then dead space and then a large target area. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have all sorts of wild white space all over a design, but it means you need to think about how big is the thing the user might click or tap on. Focus states also need to be visible. What the heck is a focus state? Simply put, a focus state is what shows if maybe I'm using only a keyboard to navigate a website and not a mouse. Now, this is something that if you're not disabled like I am, you might not realize you can do. I rely on navigating with just a keyboard sometimes due to my autism. And I especially rely on this when I'm high because my fine motor control is just, it's awful. So when I'm using tab and space and enter to navigate your website, I need to be able to see what I'm interacting with. And this is another thing I could give you a whole hour-long talk about, but you can do some reading and improve your focus states. I need to be able to, maybe I'm using a tablet or my phone to look at your site and I'm high. My way I interact with your site shouldn't be dependent on if my phone is in portrait or landscape. I should be able to use it either way. Same thing with a tablet. Because maybe for me, it's easier to hold my phone if it's in landscape mode, maybe, right? You also need to give me alternatives to using either swiping gestures or multi-finger gestures like pinch. Sorry, it's hard to, like things like this, right? Or, oh, you need a 3-finger, whatever. Those complicated gestures are really difficult if I'm high and struggling with my fine motor control, but also if I have a disability of some kind that impacts my fine motor control. So give me alternatives to doing complicated gestures with my fingers. I guess that's what complicated gestures with my fingers. Anyways, one of the next ones was being easily confused. So ways to fix that on top of all the other things we've already said. Those will help things be less confusing. I also need to be given either tooltips or helper texts and just in general clear instructions. Give me lots of little helpful bits of information on the page that will help me do what I want. In my design program, for example, right? If I'm wanting to switch which tool I'm using, if I hover over it, it's showing me a little tooltip saying the name of it. Things like that. Maybe I have an icon that is on a website that it's not clear what that icon is. Maybe have a little, there should be hover text explaining what it does. You should also have straightforward language on the page. Try to avoid jargon and things like that. But if you have to have unusual words or abbreviations that the person using it might not know, just define them either directly in the text on the page or using a little tooltip. And as I talked about before, in general, use common interaction patterns. I have had lovely designers I have worked with design really cool new out there things like different ways a cursor could look. And it's a circle and it moves in different interesting ways. And that's really cool. It's beautiful. But it's going to be a huge struggle for folks who have a disability, folks who are high, folks who are not digitally literate, things like that, if you use an uncommon interaction pattern. So it might feel a little boring to use a standard cursor or a standard menu or things like that, but it really is so necessary for those of us who are easily confused. Also, as we talked about altered perception of time, and don't worry, I'm keeping an eye on time, remove time requirements. Don't give me a timer for how long something can be in my cart. Don't require complex patterns or durations of input. Don't require me to hold for 3 seconds and then let go to do something. Don't require timing at all. Also, as I mentioned before, give me activity logs and records. So that way I can remember how long ago that happened. I might think when I'm high, I totally told my wife that. I told her that hours ago. Why hasn't she fed the cats yet? Like I asked her to hours ago. And then if I go into my messages with my wife, I can see it was only 5 minutes ago. And my perception of time was off. It helps me out. Also, in general, warn before you time me out due to inactivity. So if you're going to clear everything from my cart because I haven't bought it within an hour, if for some reason you can't remove that time requirement, tell me about it before you do it. Okay. Let's wrap it up. We have a few minutes here. So in general, what's my recommendation for you? To make things better for people who are high and to make things better for those of us with disabilities, follow those standard guidelines I gave you. the WCAG, those sets of principles, apply them. Also, listen to people with disabilities. We're experts in our own experience. So involve people with disabilities in your user testing, things like that. Here's the other thing I want to note. As I mentioned, I am a person with a disability, and that is why all of this is relevant to me. Oh, right. Sorry. That was an extra slide. This is what we talked about. Whatever. I, however, am a white person giving a talk about cannabis. So let's own that a little bit. As of 2017, 81% of legal cannabis business owners are white. And cannabis consumption is statistically similar across different demographic groups, but Black and Latinx people are disproportionately targeted and arrested for possession. In many areas of the United States, including Illinois, where I am, and I know Colorado, where a lot of you are, dispensaries were considered an essential business. But meanwhile, 1 in 5 incarcerated people are locked up for a nonviolent drug offense in the US. And those people are disproportionately Black and Latinx. The United States is one of only 22 countries in the world that doesn't have retroactive ameliorative relief. And what does that mean? That essentially means that if a law is passing legalizing cannabis, for example, that law doesn't immediately apply to people who were convicted of a crime before it was legal. So it is not true that just if cannabis is legalized, it doesn't automatically help the people who are in prison for cannabis-related offenses. So if this talk helped you today, if you learned something or thought that was funny, I'm going to ask you to please join me in making a donation to the Drug Policy Alliance. They're a nonprofit that promotes drug policies grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. Their URL is drugpolicy.org. I'm going to be donating the amount of money that I would usually charge for a talk of this length. It's really important to me that when we are talking about designing for people who are cannabis users, we are thinking about all of the people that are in prison right now for things that you and I can currently do legally. I can give this funny, goofy talk about cannabis in a professional setting, but people are in prison for possessing cannabis. I have been Fen Slattery. You can find me at fenslattery.com, also clickstudios.com/accessibility. I know, unfortunately, we didn't have time for Q&A. However, if you would like to contact me at fslattery@clickstudios.com, I would be more than happy to set up a little half-hour session to chat with you, answer whatever questions you have for me. We can talk about accessibility or getting high, I guess, or talk about the accessibility of your website, things like that. Just shoot me an email. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something. Thank you.
Fen,
Hello.
hey, that was amazing. I'm not on camera because I took a bath while I was watching it. That was amazing. You are so awesome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. Great job. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.